So this talk is called How to Talk About That Thing You Made. I used to work in maps, and now I'm a technical writer at a small company called Salesforce. And so the idea of this talk is you can make stuff, but if you can't tell anybody what it is, then it's as if you didn't make it at all. So words are hard. Words are work. Words are also really important because the words we choose to use are going to totally change the way that people will interpret the thing that you make. So how to talk about that thing you made in 4 easy steps. 1, content. What is important to include and importantly exclude? 2, structure. What order do you put the words in? 3, language. What words do you actually use? What syntax do you use? And 4, love, because I wanted there to be a 4th thing, and it fit good on the slide. So first we're going to talk about content. Speaking of content, there's a lot of content on these slides. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but there's a link at the end, and you can go back and watch and read through all of them. So your first thing that you want to do is make an outline of all of the things that you want to include. An expository introduction, so what is the thing that you made? The tools and the data that you used, how, the purpose for its existence, why, the reason you're sharing it, the why you should care, and what to do with it now that you have it. So we're going to go through these one by one. And the expository, and at this point you're making an outline. It doesn't have to be sexy. It doesn't have to be flowy. It's just blank is a blank that does blank. So Flim-Flam Map is a mobile application that shows where flim-flams are located throughout Flim-Flamville. Very straightforward. The next, you want to talk about the tools and the data you used. Flim-Flam Map was made with open source data from the Flim-Flamville Open Data Portal and the Super Awesome Maps framework. Talking about this helps the person understand where the context of what you made, and also provides information on where to go to learn more. The purpose for its existence, this is, if you don't tell people why you did it, then people won't know why you did it. I made Flim-Flam Map because there isn't a map that shows where flim-flams are located in Flim-Flamville, which is very important. We need to know. The reason that you're sharing it, I like to do this as blank is useful for blank. Flim-Flam Map is useful for Flim-Flam managers to determine their future Flim-Flam plans with accurate Flim-Flam location data. And what to do with it now. And that's the instructions. Toggle the flim-flams on and off using the buttons to the right of the map. Filter the flim-flams by type with the drop-down. So this doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to sound good. It's literally just an outline so that you know all the things that you want to include. So next we're going to talk about structure. Once you have the outline, what order do you put it in? And there are several things to think about when you think about structure. You want to make your writing easy to follow. It can be good to repeat yourself. I know we don't want to do that a lot, especially if you come from a programming world. You especially are not supposed to repeat yourself. But when in writing, you can repeat yourself a lot. It's great. You're going to want to put the most important information first because people don't read. They skim, and they'll read the first sentence, and if it doesn't feel important to them, they'll skip to the next thing. Structure with lists and headings, so it's easy to scan and remember your audience. And it can be good to repeat yourself. Okay, so make it easy to follow. There are a lot of different ways to structure your writing depending on what you're writing. If you are describing the process of doing something, it's good to use chronological order. Do this first, then do this, then do this. Sometimes you're explaining a concept. In that case, you're going to want to start with the most general information at the top and then get more specific as you go. again, because people don't read. So you want to put the most important stuff first. And another option to do it if you're trying to explain why you made something is problems and solutions. So, many flim-flam managers were struggling to find where the flim-flams were. So we decided to include the flim-flam data specifically, or whatever your context is. I mean, we're all making flim-flam maps anyway, so. It can be good to repeat yourself. Kathy Sierra is an amazing, amazing writer. She wrote all the Head First programming books. So if you ever use Head First Java or any of those, and she gives a great talk and has a great book about making badass users. And the idea is that you're not trying to make the best documentation ever. You're trying to make the best user ever. And that can mean doing things that maybe, again, don't feel super sexy. They don't feel like the best thing you've ever written. But if they are intended to help someone, then it's okay, because you don't want the person to have to flip back to the previous chapter to remember things. You want to put it right there for them. Most important information first. So anyone in journalism knows about the inverted triangle. The inverted triangle is where you put the most important information first. What is the headline? What is the most important thing? And then you drill down into more specifics over time. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I guarantee you read the first part first, and the second part second, and the third part third, and the very top last, because that's how our brains process. Similar to a visual hierarchy in a map, the most important things come first. So even if it's not technically in that order, like it is on this graphic, when you're writing, you really want to put the most important information first. Use lists and headings. People gloss over big blocks of text. If something is in a list, you can put it in a bulleted list. If something, there are some rules that we'll talk about later about the number of words you should put in a sentence and the number of sentences you should put in a paragraph. If something spans more than a few lines, again, people aren't going to read it. In the context here, we're talking about writing about something you made, and you want people to care about it as much as you do. So organizing the information in a way that's easy to understand is really valuable. Remember your audience. Who are you writing for? What can we assume that they know? What can we assume that they don't know? What information does blah blue ding dong need to know in order to use the flim flam map to the best of their ability? And so that can change the way that you structure the information, and also what you do and don't include. You don't need to explain what a flim-flam is if you're writing for a flim-flam manager. So to reiterate, you want to make it easy to follow, repeat yourself, put the most important information first, use lists and headings, remember your audience, and repeat yourself. So the third part is language. And when we talk about technical writing, this is the thing that comes up the most. Because the way that we structure our sentences and use words can change the way that people understand. So this is just a small smattering of the things that I think are most important. This list can go on forever, but these are the things I think are most important. Using present tense and active voice, defining acronyms and jargon, not trying to be too clever by using cliches, concise, consistent, and direct. So in terms of present tense and active voice, this is helpful for quick understanding, especially with instructions, but also it's helpful for translation. A lot of people, when they're reading something, if the English isn't their first language, they're going to pop it right into Google Translate. If you use convoluted sentence structures, the sentence that comes out on the other side might not make any sense. So flim-flams will be shown on the map versus show flim-flams on the map. You want to be as direct and clear as possible. And the present tense and active voice are helpful for that. defining or avoiding acronyms and jargon. So this data comes from the FFMD and shows riverine avifauna distribution. That example comes directly from plainlanguage.gov, not the flimflam part, but the riverine avifauna. So this data comes from the flimflam manager database, FFMD, and shows a riverbird distribution. And then in the future, once you've defined the acronym, you can use FFMD later, but you've defined it once, so people know what it means, and we don't assume that they know what that means. Don't use cliches. Again, this is not only for translation, but regionalisms. Take a gander is one that is my favorite example, but this can be anything from like in and of itself, or last but not least. These are regionalisms, they are English specific, and if you try to translate them, you're assuming that the user knows what that means, and they don't. So you don't have to say take a gander, you can say look at. And here's a short list of some from a book called Technical Writing Essentials. I linked to it later, but yeah, as plain as day, ballpark figure, few or far between. These are you don't think about them as cliches, but they are. So always try to be direct. Be concise. A number of can be many. A sufficient number of at this point in time. These are turns of phrase that why use many word when less word do trick, you know? It's faster and easier to use the more simple term. I'm not going to read this, but these two paragraphs mean the exact same thing. This is from plainlanguage.gov, and it's a great example of how you can try to be cool and cute and clever and flowy, but really, I'm not going to read that paragraph, but I am going to read that sentence. Be consistent. Set the styling for your flimflams using the type property. Filter on the date property. The word property can also be switched out for attribute or another word. And if you're trying to describe something and get someone to understand, you don't want to use words interchangeably, even though you might have learned that in English class, that you want to use different words to make your writing more interesting. The goal isn't to make your writing interesting, it's to make your writing clear. And be direct. Directness is kindness. This example, I didn't update this example. My bad. What this is supposed to say is, now that we've blah, 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 let's blah, 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 instead of do blah, 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 right? You don't need to make it super friendly. It doesn't have to be fun-gauging. You know, you can just be direct and clear, and that is actually more kind to the reader. So to reiterate, use present tense, use active voice, define your acronyms and your jargon, don't use cliches, be concise, be consistent, and be direct. So the last part, the love part, I figured out finally what I wanted it to mean after I put it in the beginning. So we make things because we love what we do. Right? We wouldn't do it otherwise, or because we get paid, but that's a different kind of love. If we can communicate about them clearly, then we can share that love with other people, and more people will be able to know what we do and care about it. And maybe that'll lead to a job, or you'll sell your thing, or get a promotion, or have a new opportunity, and that's great, that's awesome. But if nothing else, you'll be able to share what matters to you and help other people understand what you're making. And that seems worth thinking about the words a little bit more. So that's my talk. I have a list of resources here. A lot of this content came from plainlanguage.gov. There are actually statutes and laws about how government communications should be written. And different government agencies have their own kind of well, they all have the same rules. They have to follow the same things. So a lot of these come from that. It's also down here, I have a list, or I have a link to the Simplified Technical English standard, which is a standard that was created for the aeronautics and manufacturing industry, because that's a place where you really want to have strong, clear instructions, because if you do it wrong, then who knows, a plane could fall out of the sky. So a lot of these tools are really useful, and they encompass the things I talked about and a lot more. And there's a link to my slides, and thank you very much.
Amazing, Lyzi. We're going to rename PCD to Practical Flim Flam Cartography Day now. All right, we have lots of time for questions. Yes.
I love lists, and I use them all the time, but I get growled for them. People give me shit over it. Just use them, the hell with them, or what?
Well, what do people say?
It's too I'm an engineer, so it's like, it looks too, boring. I don't know. I can't remember the complaints, but they just don't like. They want it in a paragraph, and it's like, no, I want to be clearer.
Yeah, so one option is do both. Write the paragraph, and then, it's okay to repeat yourself. So you can say, to reiterate, list item 1, list item 2, list item 3. But there's lots of different types of writing, too. If you're trying to market something, you might not use all of these rules. But if you're trying to build understanding, you can incorporate some of them and not others, or, again, do both, do it all. A lot of times we're working within limits and constraints of, like, how long can something be? But if someone pushes back and says, make a list of instructions in a paragraph instead of a list, I would say, why? Why do you want that? And then point them to plainlanguage.gov and say, show me where that says that's okay.
I'm curious about your advice for a particular way that I write things in some of the tutorials that I make. I tend to use a lot of first-person plural language that goes kind of along the lines of your counterexample in being direct. I might say something like, well, now let's do this thing. And my thought behind that is, if somebody's feeling potentially uncertain or intimidated following along, maybe it might help them feel slightly better if I sort of virtually appear next to them, we're doing this. But it's not as direct, and I wonder, do you think that it's possibly just doing more harm than good to lead them down that little aside path? Well,
I totally understand it, and that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of content that, especially even at Salesforce, that does that. In my personal opinion, by giving the second person imperative instead of the first person plural, you're actually giving agency to the user. So if you say, let's click here, then maybe psychologically they're thinking, I don't know if I can do this myself. We need to do this together. But if you say, okay, click here, do this, then you're letting them be the owner of that behavior. And also it helps distinguish when you're writing, like if you made something and you are helping someone else use it, then we can be we, and you can be you, and it makes it easier to describe, like, we included this because blah, blah, blah. But that's just my personal opinion. But your mileage may vary.
This is a bit of a follow-on to Daniel's question, but when I write for myself, I want to have some of my voice, which seems to go against the being direct part of your advice. And so how would you square that circle?
Well, again, I think you can have both. If you're writing, if you're doing instructional writing, you definitely want to be direct, but I also include my voice as well. It really, it depends on the goal. So, I'm standing up here talking about flim-flams and being cheeky about it, but also able to say directly, be concise, be consistent. And again, this is where headers and sections come in really well. So at the very beginning of a section, you can say, click here to blah, blah, blah. And then you can have a paragraph, or in your paragraph, you can say why you do it that way. And that's maybe a place where your voice can come in, or where you can be a little bit more personal. But these are principles from technical writing, so it really depends on what you're trying to make. I think that as long as you include the sort of direct instructional and clear work, then you can add other stuff too. But it's more about like making it easy to follow and thinking about sort of most important information first and then exceptions and specifications later. You really can do both and make it your own.
I'm reading a book about trust by Henry Cloud, if any of you know him. And I feel like this is about trust building, that you're looking out for the best interests of the person who is using your product. And I love this. It's exactly in line with what I was reading. And he talks about doctors, especially like experts in their field, and teaching faculty doctors, and it's all about them and their ego. And, I know what's best for you without even asking the person, what are your symptoms? So I feel like that very first introduction where you were talking about empower your user and make the best user, that was just mind-blowing for me. I love the way you summed that up. I teach technical writing to my students.
Oh,
and
great.
I posted a link to the suggestions to authors on the Slack from the USGS, and it totally is in line with everything you talked about. Just drills down a little bit more if you have like real specific questions about exact terminology with geospatial data. But thank you so much. It was an amazing talk.
Oh, sure. Kathy Sierra talks about competency models in her writing, from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, unconscious competence, and conscious competence. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But the idea when you are instructing is to live in the conscious competence space, knowing what you know that is specific to what you know, and as opposed to an expert who has unconscious competence. They don't really distinguish between what they know that is specialized and what everyone might know. So that sort of like understanding what you can provide that is useful, that you need to be direct about, is a good way to think about it. So yeah, competency models also helpful.
All right, give a round of applause for Lyzi. Thank you so much.